Anthropic this past week got designated as a supply chain risk by the Pentagon. Anthropic was actually volunteering resources to work on weaponry for the government. It was just that the government didn't take them up on it.
Kind of like how Palantir has their forward deployed engineers, you know?
Welcome back to the Pre-Trade Pod. I'm Pierce Freeman.
And I'm Rich. Pierce, how was Japan, dude?
Extraordinary, Rich.
Yeah?
Have you been before?
No.
It was my first time to Japan, second time in Asia. And I don't really know what I was expecting, to be honest. It was a ski trip. So we were expecting snow. We actually ended up getting no snow.
That's the opposite we want.
An unprecedented season in
Did you
Hokkaido.
get Japan, though?
We got Japan.
Oh,
yeah. So
okay,
we checked that off the box. We ended up going to Kyoto and Tokyo instead. But I'm excited to be back and with you in a new studio.
Yeah, where are we, Pierce?
Very exciting. We're in a new studio. What more can I say?
I don't know.
We're still in San Francisco.
We're still in San Francisco. We're actually in Japan, now.
That's right. Yeah. This is a long lead in to say that we're no longer in the States.
That's right, dude. That's right.
Richard couldn't find an apartment in San Francisco. So actually now we're in Japan.
Too pricey. And I thought, you know what? Let's just go to Tokyo. Let's just call it.
So anyway, for the time being, we're still in San Francisco.
That's
I'm
right.
having a blast in this new studio. If you're not currently subscribed on YouTube, would love to see you on there. You can see our faces. We're actually real people.
Yeah.
Rich, today we're going to be talking about Anthropic's lovers feud with the Pentagon, a new approach for faster model inference. Chinese frontier labs are trying to exfiltrate data from Claude, and then some departures within the Qwen family.
Oh, let's do it, dude.
Getting back to Asia. Okay. So I want to take you on a journey here, Richard, if you don't mind. This is a long wind-up. I think it's important. Anthropic this past week got designated as a supply chain risk by the Pentagon. Supply chain risk is a technical classification that's technically reserved for foreign adversaries, like Huawei has this classification, but it's usually in some country that the US doesn't have good relationships with, and it limits the government's ability to do business with that company. So it basically blocks all the procurement from the federal government, from the
no
states,
contracts for them.
No contracts,
Yep.
and importantly for contractors of the federal government. So
I see.
This would block Lockheed Martin, this would block Boeing from using these providers. So it's kind of like an umbrella policy. As far as I can tell, this is the first time it's been applied to an American company.
The first time.
One.
Wow, that's a big deal.
Yeah, it's a pretty unprecedented policy change. This all got started back in summer of 2025 last year when the Pentagon signed contracts with Anthropic, Google, OpenAI, and xAI. But Anthropic got the golden ticket first. They were the first clearance for classified use. They were deemed the most advanced, and they're the only ones, if you were in the government, you could use at the level of secret within the Pentagon.
What a vote of confidence.
Totally.
Right? To be given like that designation first.
And also that much far ahead of your other competitors.
And it's crazy that no one knew about this summer
Yeah.
2025. Like I had no idea that Claude was even being used by the government.
Same. This did not cross my desk.
Totally.
I think people started to get wise to this after the Maduro operation, which we talked about on the pod maybe like a month or two ago. Time is such an illusion these days. There were some newspapers that reported out that Claude had helped triage some documents relating to the operation. It's still unclear exactly what they did, but I'm thinking something as simple as like document classification or like extracting data from some large corpus. Pretty rote data processing stuff, but they used Claude in order to do it. Anthropic didn't seem to like that very much and started asking some questions about their contract with the Pentagon and their fair use policy. And after that, the Pentagon started pushing for some language that would explicitly grant them permission to use AI for all lawful purposes.
I love that phrase, all lawful purposes.
Yeah, same with me. And like that phrase, it was like 3 words, ended up spawning this entire dispute between Anthropic and the Pentagon, where Anthropic just didn't want to agree to that language. And the Pentagon says, well, if it's not against the law, we have to be able to do it. You know, it's like in national security interests that we're allowed. Anthropic, on the other hand, pointed out that technically all lawful purposes could include mass domestic surveillance and autonomous weapons that are only legal because the law hasn't caught up yet, right?
Yeah. Yeah. They're saying basically that all lawful purposes is a little bit of a trap because currently the law isn't correctly defining what a lawful purpose is.
That's exactly right. Especially with AI-specific pipelines and policies, the federal government right now is basically saying, anything goes. We're not going to allow either states or our own federal government to put constraints within AI usage. So if it's open terrain, I think Anthropic got a little suspect at that. On February 24th, Pete Hegseth sat down with Dario Amodei, who's the CEO of Anthropic, and basically gave him an ultimatum that either you sign this new revised language by Friday, 5 p.m., or you're out of the federal government. Anthropic then released a public statement on the 26th saying no, they wouldn't budge on either the surveillance clause or fully autonomous weapons. And then the ban from the Pentagon, you know, our friend Pete Hegseth came true on his word, dropped on the 27th. So it was like this 3-day span where this all really escalated. The next day, the 28th, OpenAI announced their deal with seemingly the same exact safeguards that Anthropic was looking for. No mass surveillance, no autonomous weapons, no social credit system. However, OpenAI did end up accepting the all lawful purposes clause that Anthropic refused to sign, right? So they kind of did both.
They
said,
got the best of both worlds.
Actually, no. I don't know about that. But
I mean, it sounds to me like OpenAI was like, look, this whole all lawful purposes thing, we don't really know what that means. Let's have that in the contract, but then let's spell out the things that we actually don't want to do explicitly.
I think that's exactly right. So some people were saying that is necessarily in tension with one another, where they're spelling things out that right now are technically lawful, but that they don't want in the contract. But then they're simultaneously saying that all lawful purposes are allowed. So which clause is going to take precedent?
The only
in this
people
contract?
winning in this are the lawyers. Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Who are making a ton of money, I bet, off of these little nuanced details.
They're just printing on their hourlies.
Totally.
So, look, I'm kind of two minds here. On one hand, it does kind of feel like everyone's being a little bit overly pedantic with the language that is in use here. Like it's one clause in one terms of service contract is supposed to stop us from like the worst implications of AI being deployed in the wild for military purposes. On the other hand, I do think that we have legitimately unlocked something new with modern language models and LLM specifically, where the performance is just so good. It allows you to automate the kind of analytics opportunities that you would previously have had to constrain just on human labor.
And we don't even really know what that is yet as lay people. You know, it's almost like hard to fathom what it's being used for in the government.
I'm sure it's like top secret or highly classified.
This is why everyone's like, what does Palantir even do? Like we don't really understand what this technology even is to begin with.
What does their software look like? I think the people who actually would be in the know are either the federal government or Congress. And even then, maybe Congress isn't like briefed properly.
Yep.
So they're certainly not coming out in public and saying like, hey, we're concerned about the use cases here. So anyway, Rich, do you feel like Anthropic would be pushing this hard if Congress was more effective at present and was not just completely unable to pass any kind of AI regulation? Or do you feel like this is more of a security theater situation on the part of Anthropic, where as they're gearing up for their IPO, they figures, yeah, they might lose this Pentagon contract, but this is really good for the brand? Like, where do you kind of fall on this?
I think that Dario is being pretty consistent with his actual personal point of view on this. I don't think that Dario is necessarily trying to squeeze out a lot of extra profit from something he doesn't believe in. That is to say, I genuinely do think that he cares about safety and interpretability of these models.
You buy it. You buy the mission statement.
I think Dario believes it. I think he buys it. I think it just also so happens to be the case that there is a very marketable pitch to be made around this point of view, and that he realizes this and is also capitalizing on it, right? So I think he is being very pragmatic in making sure that everyone knows that he genuinely believes this. And I think he genuinely thinks that this is an important mission that he wants to uphold, like the fact that these models shouldn't be used for military use. I think if you would like put him in a lie detector, I think, it would show that he's being truthful, that he like genuinely cares about this.
Do you feel like he doesn't want these things to be used for military use, period, or just these carve outs of military use? Because they did sign this contract with the Pentagon originally. So like it was obviously going to be used for some military use, but maybe just military use abroad versus domestic.
I think
or
it's
you think
the
Dario
domestic
is like,
surveillance that Dario doesn't like.
Okay.
I mean, look, I don't know the guy. We've never hung out.
Totally,
you know what I mean?
totally. You haven't really kicked it.
Although Dario, if you want to hang out,
yeah,
please, dude.
We're open.
My Wednesdays are pretty free. But from everything I've read about him, one of the reasons he left OpenAI was frankly because he wasn't really sure that the vision of the company was in line with his own personal aspirations. And I mean, the company's spending billions of dollars on their whole interpretability stuff. They basically created the whole field of mechanistic interpretability in order to understand what these models are doing. And so I genuinely think that they do care about the safety of the models, that these models are aligned with human interests. I think this is all very much a strongly held belief that Dario has. I don't think Dario really knows what the relationship should be of Anthropic with the government. I think this is an open question. And I think Dario also doesn't know what government policies necessarily should be when it comes to regulating these AI models. I think that he believes that there should be some process through which to, think about these things in a way that isn't just a money-making scheme. I think Dario would probably like to have some sort of like oversight over these policies and these models. But I think fundamentally, like no one has the answer. I think Dario does care about these things. I think he wants to basically just, show the world that Anthropic can be the one company that cares about this and can make a buck out of it. But I don't know how much more there is to it. Now, I do think that Anthropic has a good marketing team. I think they're definitely squeezing this a little bit more than maybe necessary. But what do you think?
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree. I mean, the whole company is oriented around this public benefit corporations, PBC, which I think they were one of the first major companies to adopt this model from the offset. It's different from a nonprofit. It's different from a for-profit. It's kind of somewhere in the middle that basically says, well, yes, we're going to make money, but we're not going to violate our principles. We have these things and are established for the benefit of the public good. Again, maybe that's like paying lip service. I think if you really wanted to nitpick it, you could say, well, you're still making the same money. You're still giving the same tender offers, like whatever. But I really do think genuinely there's something in the DNA of the company and the leadership, and also just knowing people there that have gone through this interview process. They really make sure that the culture fit of joining Anthropic.
Yeah, they care about the culture for sure.
They genuinely do. They like really want to make sure that you believe to your core that AI models can be a force of good and that you care about them as like fulfilling this like higher order purpose of society. And I think that there's an admission within all of this, at least from my own POV, that these models are already out there. And the question is, what do we do about them? And like Anthropic is one of these frontier companies, probably recognizes that they're all roughly in the same ballpark of performance. Like, yeah, Anthropic got the nod first, but I think that they probably feel like we can only control our fiefdom. So if we feel like the law is lagging and not catching up appropriately, we're probably going to invoke whatever power we have, albeit limited in these discussions with the government to say, look, like, you maybe, yes, could go out and use some open source model to do this kind of surveillance. You're welcome to do that. But like, so long as we can dictate terms of what we want to sell into the government, we want to govern it with these policies.
I think that's right.
Maybe they're trying to avoid some slippery slope situation as well, where Anthropic already goes through all these steps to try to make their pre-trained models safer, which is all this like post-training that they do, this constitutional alignment. You could imagine at the extreme, the government could ask Anthropic to get rid of that safety stuff. Like maybe they don't want it fine-tuned in a certain kind of way. So I think there's also a dynamic here too, where Anthropic is kind of asserting that this good that they're bundling for the government is pretty much packaged as is. And it's not really up for grabs for the government to be able to dictate changes to the weights. I feel like that's also kind of embedded within this contractual language that
that the government can actually see the weights.
That's exactly right. Or maybe they can, but like they can't request modifications to like undo some of these.
Well, if they had the weights, they could have their engineers fine tune it themselves.
That's a good point, but maybe they can't force Anthropic to. So anyway, I do agree. I'm curious your read on this one section because Dario ended up publishing this public notice kind of in the aftermath of this, where he was justifying the Anthropic position to the US population. And there was this one section here under fully autonomous weapons where he says, we have offered to work directly with the Department of War on R&D to improve the reliability of these systems, being autonomous weapons, but they have not accepted this offer. In addition, without proper oversight, fully autonomous weapons cannot be relied upon to exercise a critical judgment that our highly trained professional troops exhibit every day. They need to be deployed with proper guardrails, which don't exist today, which I actually thought was an under-discussed piece of this entire press release, which is like Anthropic was actually volunteering resources to work on weaponry for the government. It was just that the government didn't take them up on it.
Oh, interesting. I feel like part of it is also that Anthropic wants to be in the loop. I think part of the paragraph you were reading might include that Anthropic wants to have some engineers that are part of this process, and they would like to be able to dictate some of the terms. I don't know if it's in that exact same paragraph, but I think contextually, it's also important to say that. Kind of like how Palantir has their forward deployed engineers,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're helping establish how this stuff actually shows up in practice.
Exactly. Okay, Pierre. So in addition to Anthropic, one of the big trends in AI recently has been the rise of so-called flash or mini models. Have you seen these?
Oh, yeah.
These are like variants of the flagship systems of companies like Anthropic and OpenAI.
With kind of the intention that they're faster, probably a little bit dumber, cheaper.
Yeah, exactly. And so the idea is that when you're selecting a model, you can choose between either the thinking model, which will spend a lot more tokens thinking about its output before it actually generates that, or you can select one of these flash or mini models, which are dramatically faster and cheaper to run and basically enable you to do real-time applications that would otherwise be too expensive if you use some of these more thinking-based models. So achieving this speed up isn't due to just a single breakthrough necessarily. Like there's been a lot of advancements that have allowed us to increase the speed with which these models do their computations, But one of the key techniques has always been this thing called speculative decoding. But recently, there's been this technique called speculative decoding, also known as SSD.
Speculative squared decoding.
Exactly. Which has made a big splash and has been making the rounds in the Twitter sphere.
Yeah, I saw this.
So
Treedow was on this paper, right?
I was about to say, so the team of folks are all from Stanford. The first author on this paper is actually a first-year PhD student at Stanford. So that's a pretty big initial piece of work that he's done in the first couple of months of his PhD. But anyway, so Tree is obviously well known for his work on flash attention as well as state space models like Mamba. Before we go into this speculative decoding, do you want to first explain, Pierce, what is speculative decoding to begin with? What is even decoding? Maybe would be a better starting point.
Maybe we build upon this linearly a little bit, where we first and we say decoding. What is that? Then we talk about speculative decoding, cover what that is, and then we cover speculative, because they all kind of build on one another.
Sure.
So do you want to cover what decoding is as like a general principle?
A language model by itself is a probability distribution. It's basically just like an engine of a car, right? And I think this is actually a pretty good analogy. Because think about it. It's basically like the engine that lets you produce text. But once you have the language model, you have to decide basically how to wire it up to surrounding circuitry to actually be able to start producing text. And the analogy, this would be like putting an engine into a car so it can actually start driving. And so you have to make certain decisions with how do you use this engine? What do you want to do? The simplest approach is to use something known as a greedy approach, which is take this language model, which is just a probability distribution. It just tells you what is the probability of the next word occurring, and just pick that most likely next word, right? That's greedy. But you can start doing a bunch of interesting stuff that isn't just that. Like you can, wire it up to a different language model, or you can use something known as Bayesian decoding, or use a different type of statistical analysis to predict what next word you should use. So I think by itself, you have to understand that like a language model doesn't produce text. It literally doesn't. It's just a probability distribution. You can't do anything with it. It's the strategy that you then use to pick, using that probability distribution, what words you want to select, which is the decoding strategy. It's like you decode from it, right? And speculative decoding is the thing that everyone's been using these last 2-3 years just because it's much faster.
It's this kind of clever mathematical property, if you think about it, where you have the big model, which is the main model that you're doing inference with. And then you have some really small model that usually uses the same architecture and is trained on the same data, but it's a lot fast. You kind of want it to be like roughly order 5x or 10x as fast, which usually means making it 5 or 10x as small. And when you're doing the inference, you're taking your existing sentence that you have right now, and let's say that we're trying to predict the next 5 tokens that are within the sequence. So what you normally do is in autoregressive inference, you feed that whole thing in, you get the next token, you then append that to what you had before. So you have one more word, you feed that in again, you get the next word, and then you incrementally build up to 5 additional words. That's kind of just classic greedy decoding. The cool thing with speculative decoding is you use this smaller model to do that same prediction on those 5 tokens, which again happens really quickly because it's a small model that's doing it. And then once you have that full package, you can just do one additional call to the big model, which then evaluates those 5 words at the same time. So best case, if your small model is really well calibrated and is pretty smart, the big model will validate that all of what you just predicted is correct. And you'll get those 5 tokens basically for the cost of 1 call to the big model plus 5 really fast calls to the small one. And worst case, if only one of them is right, or if you have to just do the whole thing over again, you're not really invoking that much of a time penalty. So on net, you can usually end up with like a 2x or a 3x speed up.
Over the greedy approach.
Exactly. Over just calling the big one naively every single token. Okay, Rich. Now do you want to cover speculative decoding?
Sure. So speculative decoding is you take speculative decoding, so where you have this smaller model that's producing text and you have a bigger model that verifies it. This is known as the draft and the verifiers you were saying. And here the important intuition is that one of the bottlenecks of normal speculative decoding is that once the small model has produced text and has sent that text over to the verifier, the small model is just like sitting around. It doesn't really have it has no work to do basically, right? It's waiting for the verifier to tell it, hey, either that was good or that was bad, right? Here the idea is that when you're producing text as the smaller model, sometimes the smaller model can have a very high confidence that the text will be correctly verified. right? So let's imagine that, the draft model is producing some text, something that is very common, like maybe the user has asked, what's the temperature like in the city? And the small model, as it's producing text,
it's obviously cold,
is saying, look, like,
foggy.
It's going to be pretty foggy in San Francisco. And as it's producing that text, it knows itself that, there's a good chance that this is the right continuation of the sequence. So what it can then do is it can send that to the verifier, but after it's produced that text, it can just say, hey, I am 99% confident that the verifier is going to verify this as being a correct continuation. So let me actually already keep decoding more tokens because I'm pretty confident that, my boss here, the verifier, is going to give me the stamp of approval. So let me just keep generating more text.
Mm-hmm.
And so that basically then lets the draft model keep producing more tokens while the verifier is busy verifying the previous tokens. It's this clever little trick to basically parallelize the work of the draft model with the work of the verifier.
Yeah, it's literally like putting up a PR as an engineer, sending it off to your code reviewer. You're not going to stop working on what comes next. You're going to assume it roughly looks good, and you're going to continue on and do something additional, right?
It's pretty obvious in hindsight. It's been surprising that this isn't something we've adopted before.
Does this kind of rely on the assumption that both models can fit on the GPU concurrently? Because I would think immediately the one challenge to this maybe is if you have these two things doing separate matrix multiplications in parallel, like maybe there would be some memory or efficiency bandwidth limitations to actually trying to coordinate those two things in parallel. Does that not really end up being the case?
Not necessarily. I mean, you can have two models running on the same chip in parallel.
Totally.
So I don't think that should be too much of a problem. But I think what this does speak to is the fact that orchestration between different models has become more important than the actual model architecture itself.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Like in some sense, whether the draft model is the exact same version of the bigger model, just a smaller version of it, or a completely different type of model, it's kind of independent of this architecture, this method working correctly.
Okay, Rich, staying on this Anthropic beat, this last week they went public accusing 3 Chinese AI companies of running industrial scale operations to steal Claude's capabilities. So, they're pointing the finger at DeepSeek, Moonshot AI, who's behind the Kimi model architectures that we talked about at length, maybe ad nauseum, and Minimax, which, to be honest, I have not heard of before as a lab.
Yeah, me neither, man. It kind of went like under the radar.
Yeah, maybe this was their original launch. They were coming out swinging by stealing Claude secrets. So basically what these labs were doing was spinning up fake IP addresses that pretended they were in the US, creating accounts on Claude.ai, just like we would, and then asking the frontier models questions that they themselves didn't know the answers to. Then they would take those answers and put them in their own models' training phases like additional data points. But instead of actually gathering them via like some expensive manual data labeling process or crawling the open web, they just took them from a model that's already been pretty well trained. Do you maybe want to spend some time talking about why distillation in general is so powerful, and maybe even why it seems to have such a sexy, unavoidable allure for these Chinese AI labs?
Yeah, so everything in research recently has pointed to the fact that the most important thing when training a model is the data. We've known this for a long time, but it's really in the last 2 years that folks have really underlined the fact that what makes a good model much better than a bad model is that the good model has access to better data. And frankly, like this is why, Neo labs are spinning up, because they think that they have some distinct edge, especially when it comes to the data, that will let them compete with someone like Anthropic or OpenAI.
It's almost like the data mode is shrinking in terms of size, right?
Basically, yeah. So there's perception that it's really quantity is less important than quality at this point. So you really need to find that high quality data, those little nuggets of gold. And if you can train your model on that and not let anyone else see that, then you might have a model that is competitive with Anthropic, if not better, on certain particular tasks. So distillation is this idea that if you can basically get a model like Anthropic's or OpenAI's to write you a bunch of data, that you can effectively reproduce the data set that they use to train these models. Like if you can prompt Chat or Claude, a million times, at the limit, you can actually start getting these models to almost reproduce the data set that they themselves were trained on. And that's worrying for companies like OpenAI and Anthropic because data is gold for them, right? It is their oil. It is what powers their models.
It's also such a big CapEx expenditure.
Exactly. And so they do everything possible to basically limit the ability of people to programmatically have these models spit out the data that they were initially trained on, because that is them losing basically their
edge.
Their edge. Exactly. And so what they accuse these Chinese companies of doing is effectively, as you were saying, creating a bunch of bots that scrape the data that they were trained on, that these models were trained on, to then themselves use that as training data for their models. And so it's seen as a form of theft by OpenAI and Anthropic. Whether or not that is theft, I think, is a really interesting legal question that we haven't really fully figured out yet.
Especially because usually when you have a conversation with chat, they actually say that you own the copyright for whatever chat produces, right? They transfer that copyright to you.
It's so interesting. I think the difference is when you're interacting with chat, you're not producing trillions of tokens of data.
Totally. So that's definitely like the material difference, probably legally, that could be governed in a different regime. They also have a clause within the terms of service that says that you won't use it to train a model that competes directly with the original frontier provider.
Right. Exactly.
So it's like, honestly, it's exactly like the Pentagon case in some level, where it's like this one clause of the red line or terms of service they intend to govern against this like whole wide ranging set of possible vulnerabilities that you could have to leak the data. One thing that I thought was pretty clever is not just the distillation that they were doing of like, it asks some question, it gets some results, you then train the model on it. It was trying to simulate the thinking stream of the model by asking it to reverse engineer what the internal thinking would have been. Because the way that we actually generate these thinking tokens, which is what happens when you ask chat some question and it thinks for a while, it's actually continuously generating tokens in the background that it's using internally to say, okay, well, if A leads to B and B leads to C, how do we get all the way to F?
Yeah, but they don't let you see that. Obviously.
They don't let you see that, or at least they don't let you see the like real tokens. They might give you some summary view that's just like really top level, because again, that's one of the advantages that they have. And they originally had to train that on thousands, tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of examples of people walking through real math problems, real philosophy problems, narrating our internal dialogue, and they use that to train the model to do the same. That was really expensive, like millions.
Getting that data set.
Tens of millions of dollars to try to get that data set from people. These frontier labs are basically trying to bootstrap that same data set by just asking Claude, hey, Claude, pretend you're a person. Give me this thinking stream of actually how do you get from A to F? And I'm going to use those tokens to train my own thinking model. So it is one of these things. It's like very hard to prevent, because if you or I were to ask Claude, okay, walk us through your thinking process, I would want to give a proper answer. And I think Anthropic and OpenAI would probably agree. Like that's a legitimate user query to make. It's when you're in this level of like industrial state sponsored.
It's a gray zone. It's like, how much data do you have to be asking of these models for you to start collecting a data set?
That's exactly right.
That lets you train your own models.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah. It's a really hard question. And at the same time, it's like, because it's in the cloud, they can probably detect this and prevent it. But for models that are open sourced, like, GPT, OSS, if they open sourced, no reason why people couldn't spin this up on their own GPU cluster and do the same thing. So, at the extreme, I think the data sets have been seen as this very like black box system that we very much couldn't get access to from the outside looking in. I think in some ways that's kind of a fallacy. Like, I don't think we yet know technically how to really prevent people from probing the model in a way that gets it to reveal some of this internal data that could then be used to bootstrap another data set. So like you said, it's a really interesting time to be thinking about data as a moat, seeming like it's less of a moat than it once was thought to be.
Less of a moat, but more important than we had initially thought, which is the irony.
Certainly for the quality of the data.
Because for a long time, we were just training these models on Wikipedia and we were like, hey, good enough.
They were
you know what I mean? Wikipedia and like some books does pretty well. But then we realized, hey, actually, no, if we train it on Reddit conversations and how humans actually talk and on movies and on all this other data, that you actually end up with a much better model. So the quality of the data, ironically, is now seen as way more important as the moat has also been shrinking.
Totally.
There's this kind of tension there.
It's a richer moat. The water's more pure.
Something like that.
It's not bad.
Yeah.
Aqua blue.
We can put a trademark on that. All right, Pierce. The last thing I want us to talk about today is a little bit of drama, dude. A little spicy drama.
Talk to me.
The Qwen departures. So this was a crazy week. This week, the team behind one of the most impressive open source models, the model that frankly I use for all of my projects, Qwen, had a big little shakeup when one of the lead researchers who built Qwen, Yunyuan Lin, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, decided or posted on X that he was leaving. Now it's actually unclear whether or not he's actually left.
Oh, interesting.
But on X he said, "I'm stepping down by my beloved Qwen."
Beloved Qwen.
And I actually read that initially as "by my beloved queen."
Yeah, I know. I hear you.
Which maybe is what he meant. I don't
also,
know.
maybe inspired Qwen originally.
Oh, Qwen and Queen?
Queen?
Maybe. I don't know. Yeah. Very, very unclear, who's actually working on these models. There's a little less oversight over these Chinese models than there is for the American models. But we know that Yuan Ling is one of the lead researchers and that he is presumably leaving Alibaba's team. And that's pretty much it. And then as a result of this tweet, within hours, we know that a couple of more senior researchers actually have also left. So this kind of reminds me a little bit of the shakeup in thinking machines where you had one person leave and then like a bunch of other folk also follow.
Yeah.
So Bin Yuanhui left, Bowen Yu left, Kaixing Li. These are folks who led teams like Qwen Decoder, who led the post-training process, and also the Qwen Vision language model. Apparently, it seems that this might have been due to a reorg within the company that saw some folks from Google come in and actually take charge of the division, but that's a little bit TBD. Also, it seems like the timing here is particularly painful. Do you want to explain why that might be?
Yeah, I mean, this coincides kind of with the launch of Qwen 3.5, which everyone's been talking about. It comes in all these different size varietals, including, I think the biggest one's maybe 120 billion parameters, but it scales to really small sizes as well that you would be able to fit on a phone or on a laptop.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Qwen 3.5 is strikingly good. I think everyone's been using it recently.
I think one of the tweets in the aftermath of this departure too was someone saying that without the leadership of this individual, they also would not have been able to compete toe-to-toe with the big frontier labs and produce a model nearly this good. Like that almost gets into the data conversation that we were just having of like, this seems to be like a team that was almost focused on doing more with less in terms of physical infrastructure and access to data. And somehow they were able to churn out this model.
That's kind of the through line with these Chinese
better
companies.
Than Llama, as good as Llama.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the big realizations of the Chinese labs is that they can do really well with very little resources.
Yeah.
Like the fact that they have been embargoed from using the H200s has led them to innovate on efficiency, in ways that are really striking. So the timing here is absolutely crazy, especially given that these models just released like a couple of weeks ago. I guess like it's unclear where it stands right now. Like, is Lin actually coming back? It's a little unclear.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting that this departure, both like the hiring in of this Gemini guy, allegedly, as well as the departure of Lin, coincided also with a drop of Qwen 3.5, which everyone's been saying is an absolutely rock solid model. It's a family of models, actually, technically. It has sizes from, I think, 0.8 billion all the way to like 122. So you can kind of choose your balance of how much precision do I want for like, how much efficiency do I want in this model? And I think that range itself makes it so exciting to people because it's this idea of, you can take a really powerful one, run it in cloud GPU, but you can also take a still good but very small model and run it on a phone with like almost near real-time latency requirements. So it's a diversity of model architectures that kind of let you choose whatever you want. Maybe it's worth us spending a little bit of time talking about what brings them together, like the common architecture choices that are happening in Qwen 3.5 and how they differed from either the other Chinese architectures or from like Qwen 3.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's unclear exactly what these models are doing. We know a couple of things. So Alibaba, who we should say, by the way, I mean, is obviously the company behind Qwen, they've been doing a ton of work on efficient architectures for these models. So when we talk about a transformer model, transformers are not built the same anymore. Modern day transformer models will have the normal attention mechanism that we're used to, but nowadays, typically people will add in additional layers, sort of like wedge them in between attention blocks that aren't attention. They're something completely different. And so these are typically known as linear attention blocks. This differentiates them from normal attention blocks, which are n squared. So they're quadratic attention blocks. The idea here being that this attention mechanism looks at all of the tokens in a sequence and does very basically like a pairwise combination of these different tokens.
Mm-hmm.
It's expensive because you have to basically for each token compare how similar it is to all the other tokens in the sequence. And
Quarry value, baby.
And that really slows down the computation of these models. Linear attention is the idea that you can basically not do that. So rather than combining all of the input tokens with each other in some complex way, you can just look at the input stream in one go, in one quick pass. Now,
which is almost kind of what RNNs did.
That
like
is exactly what RNNs did. They are the OG linear attention blocks. And so nowadays what we're trying to do is reproduce RNNs effectively in a transformer. This is basically faster. It lets us do things in a way that is computationally more effective. The issue is that these things don't have the ability to do associative recall very well. There's like this fundamental tension between linear attention and quadratic attention. Quadratic attention is really good at doing associative recall, but is slow. Linear attention is really fast, but is bad at associative recall. So what's associative recall? Basically, in a linear attention block, if I give you the input stream A, B, A, B, A, what do you think is the next thing I'm about to say?
B?
B. That's right. You did it, right?
Far too long.
A linear attention model would be really confused. A linear attention models have a hard time doing this really simple task, right? And typically it's not as simple as that. It's like you can test this out by going like A, B, C, A, B, A, B, C, A, B, right?
C.
Right, exactly.
Or for like copying and pasting code, this becomes really problematic. And you know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like,
so copy pasting is something that attention models are really good at doing. Attention models are really good at literally taking.
It's the first circuit these transformer networks learn.
Exactly. They can literally just copy paste easily. Linear attention just can't copy paste, almost as a fundamental problem of its architecture. Like it's built into the architecture that it can't copy paste. And so these Qwen models are good because they figured out a way to incorporate linear attention that still has the ability to basically do this copy pasting thing. Or at least they've innovated some mechanisms that let these things still be pretty good at copy pasting. And they do this using something called a delta net. In particular, a version of the delta net known as the gated delta net. So we can maybe get into this a tiny bit. The idea here is basically that these delta nets keep a running memory state. So whenever they're processing the input, they keep this like memory. And they can, at each time step, when they're processing the next token, decide whether they want to delete from the memory or write into the memory. And they can also gate, so basically decide how much they want to write in or delete from the memory state. It's basically, think of it as like a compressed representation of everything the model has seen so far that is being continuously rewritten in place. So they keep rewriting the same thing in place. And so this gated delta net is kind of like the thing you do if you want to find something that has a pretty good trade-off between associative recall and still being a linear model. It's really quick to run. And importantly here, the Qwen model isn't just using this linear attention model. As I was saying, it wedges it in between normal attention blocks. So it's kind of like finding this happy medium between something that is fully attention and something that is quick linear attention. Anyway, that's the big innovation here. Qwen is like a pretty good new architectural choice. And in practice, it ends up being pretty efficient. The interesting thing here is that they were able to scale this approach down to 0.8 billion parameters. 800 million parameters is so small. Dude.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's so freaking small. That's insane.
Also known as 800 million parameters.
Yeah, exactly. It's so small. Like this is like the type of models we were working on in like 2000. You know, these are like tiny models comparatively to the ones we've seen recently.
Totally.
So it's really cool stuff. It is weird that this leadership change came in just as these models were released. What does that mean for the future of these models? Is there going to be a Qwen 4? Why did this even happen to begin with? These are completely unknown questions, but I really hope that a Qwen 4 model comes out because Qwen 3.5 is like the thing that everyone uses now whenever they want to like create a startup basically or experiment with some idea, right? It's like you take the Qwen 3.5 model and build off of that.
Yeah, Qwen's fantastic. Had a great data set. A good learning curriculum that they use for it. Good, I think, smart architecture choices to try to make these more efficient. Yeah, we'll see how much of the team stays. We'll also see if Lynn stays.
So here's the interesting thing. As of, I think, yesterday at 2 p.m., Lynn posted on his WeChat moments. So I think these are like kind of like
Snapchat stories.
Snapchat stories. He says, "Brothers of Qwen continue as planned. No problem."
Interesting.
What does that mean?
What does that mean?
Who knows?
Are they branching? They doing a Frontier Lab? It's kind of what it sounds like.
Oh, is that what you thought?
It's the brothers, people that left with them. Maybe the brothers are leaving.
See, I would have read that as Brothers of Qwen continue, as in like I'm still with you guys. Like I haven't left.
Yeah,
we continue as planned. I don't know.
Well, we can speculate till the cows come home, but I'm sure
maybe we should make a poly market of this, dude.
Honestly, it's a really niche.
Is he going? Who knows?
Liquidity it ends up having.
We'll see.
Yeah, I hope there's Qwen 4. I hope Alibaba doesn't get cold feet about open sourcing these models. You know, like I feel like what we've seen with some of the other labs is that they'll open source a lot, like Mistral in the early days, and then they'll get a little bit more and more and more conservative about what they open source versus what they keep in the cloud, trying to recoup some of the investment costs, I assume. So yeah, we'll have to see. But I hope there's a Qwen 4 or someone picks up the mantle, maybe the same team, and they just end up doing some other research elsewhere.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I'm excited though. This is it's cool stuff.
Yeah, it's a good time in open source. I actually feel like for the first time, I feel like we're starting to get really good small models and big models releasing open source.
Thanks to the Chinese companies, dude. That would not have been on my bingo card for 2026.
I think, same with me. Yeah, same with me.
Cool stuff.
Cool, Rich.
All right, brother. Well, I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah.
That's pretty much all I got for this week.
Till next week.
All right, buddy.
Bye,
Bye.
Rich. Okay, we're recording. We're live. We're here live on the pre-trained pod. Yeah.
Action camera.
Action cut camera.
So the pre-trained pod has become now a fashion podcast.
Hello, fam.
You know what I absolutely loathe?
Tell me.
I loathe.
Spill it all.
Then I go to a fashion show and it's just not fashion.
It's not fashion.
It's
low fashion.
It's low fashion. It's like Zara, H&M fashion.
Oh no, not that fashion. Darling, that's clothing. That's not fashion.
Not clothing. It's exactly.